as argued by the Komarovs, where diversity is complemented seamlessly with the market? How does one raise equality in difference?
Well, you know, I don't know the work of the Komarovs as well as I should. I know them well, but so I'm going to keep myself apart from the work of the Komarovs and just answer the question in general. How does one raise it? There is, of course, a great difference in how does one raise it as an outsider, or how does one raise it as an equal but different person. And this changes in terms of what theater you are speaking in. I think it's important to insist, as many people do, that, and especially literary writers, and I'm thinking now of a book on which I've written, which is J.M. Coetzee's novel, the novel Disgrace. Many people do. Diversity is not just body count. And so you have to take into account that diverse people, diversity is not a physical characteristic, visible minorities, gender, and so on. Diversity comes with a set of attitudes, and it is possible for the dominant groups to have good sets of attitudes as well. So, I mean, what can I say? I'm for diversity, but I think it can also lead to bad politics in the academy, because we don't go for quality, we just go for completely effacing differences of other kind. So I don't know, I'm probably giving an unsatisfactory answer, but that's my only way. I'm very quality focused.
Do you consider that because the next question is in the context of cynicism and pragmatism and priorities as ideologies, sorry, what alternatives are there in policies for overcoming inequalities?
I don't think very many in policies, so, but that could be because I myself confront the world of policy in the World Economic Forum, when I'm in the research and development arenas, and I see how little our movements, I mean, I'm thinking of Israel and Palestine. You know, I mean, so much, we spend so much effort boycotting, promoting public awareness, giving courses, and so on and so forth, demonstrations, you name it, it's across the board. Does not affect policy. So my feeling now is that our task is really, I mean, I will engage in a short term with movements that want to make the situation at the university more equitable. No problem there. I certainly engage in cleansing the institution, as it were. But I do believe that they're very temporary measures, and they get overcome by, subsumed in already existing structures, and policy remains distant. So my work, and that's something that relates to what I can do. The only thing I can do is classroom teaching, as it were. So my work is long-term production of problem solvers who learn from mistakes, leaders who know how to follow, etc. And of course, down below, the intuitions of democracy, which is not just promoting even justified rights, but the understanding that democracy is also other people. So, all in all, I was quoting Marx the other day, maybe yesterday, and saying that, you know, that description of the revolution of the 19th century as taking its poetry from the future, that is, I think, a very important perception, because all through Marx's writings, he's talking about capital, labor, land, everything being phenomenological, and therefore appearing, Erscheinungsformen, appearing in many different ways, and not to hold on to labor even, and not to hold on to them as real inside this system. Yet, when it comes to the revolution of the 19th century, he insists not on contentless form, the phenomenological approach where they slip from one appearance to another. You see this most strongly in capital II, but rather content. Content. And this thing that, revolutions before this, the phrase went beyond the content, the form, are you being correctly dialectical, all that stuff. He's talking about the French Revolution. But after in the 19th century, the content will go beyond the form, he says. Most English translations use the wrong words, it transcends, it makes it very Hegelian. He's not Hegelian here at all. He is talking about the not necessarily following the correct party line. So it's the poetry of the future. And to an extent, we teach in that way, or to quote Nietzsche, for the philosophers of the future. It's not going to happen now. So one has to have a very broad focus, not in my lifetime. But on the other hand, the problems are so enormous that although one must engage in short-term struggles, there's no excuse for remaining distant and skeptical and saying, oh, well, poetry of the future. No. But when one teaches, then I think one has to teach this, in my estimation, this vision of something that is not possible now. That's, again...
Well, speaking of long-term and short-term and things that seem impossible or not possible now, the last question is, how can one comprehend in the contemporary situation where human rights of women have gained strength all through the 20th century, the systematic and often increasing violence against women? How do we comprehend that?
Well, the theaters where violence against women are strongest, war and rape, those in those places we don't even think about the human rights of women. I mean, we have to be aware that the places, the theaters where the human rights of women have gained strength are very restricted. And if we look at the world at large, then it seems to me that within the places where human rights of women have supposedly increased, there is some backlash. There is also post-feminism, which then forgets all about women, so then a different kind of violence is desired, as I was talking about the desiring of violence. But the increasing of violence against women in the broad frame, that must take into account that the human rights of women gaining strength is very class-specific, very race-specific. I mean, very region-specific even. It's not something that's noticeable all over the place. And when the increase in rights of women is equated with financial independence, I think a real problem arises. Over and over again, I mean, my first activist work began in Bangladesh, the textile industry, and also this kind of microcredit without much subject formation. The young women who were coming into the cities, nobody worried about subject formation, about engaging with them, etc. And it didn't do them any good. I was just in China, in Sichuan province, and I was speaking to the women's organizations, all from the social sciences, and they're really trying to improve the condition of women. But each question brought forth an answer, which was income production. It isn't a good idea just to produce income. It's a very fine idea. I've supported myself since I was 17 years old. I know that it gives you a certain something. But it's not the only thing. To quote W.E.B. Du Bois, I would say that at the same time, At the same time, they must learn to communicate with the stars. He's talking about the emancipated slaves. He's saying, okay, they need food, clothing, and shelter, but at the same time, to communicate with the stars. So therefore, the rights of women, it's a complicated issue.
And last question that's not here, but about the seminar, if you could say what you thought of your time here in Chile. I know it was very short, and we were running around a lot, but you got to see a little bit about what's going on here, what some of the indigenous groups also have to say. What are your thoughts on
In general, and you're right, I mean, it was very quick and a lot in a little time, so very powerful. It wasn't just an intellectual situation where one can engage in judgment more easily, right? I was myself very emotionally involved all 3 days. So I think, I mean, of course, you don't get, at my age, with all my skepticism, you don't get emotionally involved so easily. So that speaks for itself. But it also brings with it the absolute responsibility of letting it settle a little. You know, I'll have to let the sediments fall a little and then ask myself. But in general, if you ask me now, it's been a very strong, very powerful kind of experience. Okay. And I thank you for it.
No, thank you for coming. You could say something, and whatever you can say about your appreciation or of what you saw about the Mapuche, what they said in the seminar, or what you have talked with the people from the Mapuche.
I liked very much the presentation of Anna Liu. Is that how you pronounce her name? Liao. Because she was giving an account of the history of the Mapuche in a, I mean, it was not something that I was unaware of, but it was very powerful to have it presented quite that way. And so I thought that allowed us to realize that she was also very aware that this is why I said twice during my talk that these are not subalterns. These are people who have brought subalternity into crisis and therefore can struggle with a generally indifferent state. So that is the judgment on a small group of very powerful people. I mean, powerful within the struggle. I very much liked the dance event yesterday.
The artistic presentation?
Yes, the artistic presentation, because I felt that what I was saying this morning, the fact that the Mapuche are not just a traditional group in the past, was so clear with that presentation that I thought, I generally am critical of conceptual art of any kind, but this was so clearly saying, pay attention to me, that I thought it really was a good thing. And this morning my conversation was also with a group of people who already were very coherent about the struggle. My work with and so I was able to really engage with them very clearly, and they agreed with my point of view as I agreed with theirs. So, but in general, the people I work with, unfortunately, have been, they're very, in class-wise, they're completely away from social movements, so that they don't know the word Dalit. As I said, many of my students have not seen trains. So these folks, the epistemic violence done to them by us, by the caste Hindus, not so much colonialism. Colonialism is just 300 years old, whereas this is thousands of years old, the caste system. And also, generally speaking, missionaries treated the so-called untouchables and the aboriginals, so-called, much better than we did. So there, the situation is very complicated, and it's not, the task is to see how damaged epistemological machines can be repaired by people who have not suffered that damage. It's an arena of mistakes, because intellectual labor cannot be taught. It's something that happens so teaching at the top, at the United States, in the United States. Very rich private university, English, French, and German, European theory at the top with PhD students, and teaching at the very bottom where people have nothing at all, and being a visible minority in the United States. So constantly there's an attempt to de-skill people like me, right? Just talk about India, nothing else. You can't teach Freud, Marx, Hegel, Heidegger, Plato. No, talk about India, de-skilling on top there, to be interpolated as a minority. And at the bottom, in my own country, to be the oppressive majority. It's a wonderful schizophrenia. I mean, I'm using it in terms of the very productive, gives you a sense of the world. So I'm speaking in terms of the 70s, you know, the idea of schizoanalyse, which is now gone. The idea of, you know, like not trying to connect and look at cause and effect and so on. Say, and then, like a schizophrenic. So, to an extent, within that context, you know, my short, see, I had actually been asked to translate stuff by Mapuche already 2 years ago by this guy Luis, whom I thanked when I began giving my speech. So all in all, it's a very limited set of responses with a limited group whom I admired greatly, and you know, an invitation to know a little bit more. So, is that an answer?